Welcome to Thrive with Us. Today I'm sitting with Judy Saud, a licensed psychologist here in Dubai with us at Thrive Wellbeing Center. She has a double master's degree in Columbia University in the US. Judy is an ASECT certified sex therapist and she supports individuals and couples at Thrive. Today we're going to be picking her brain about intimacy and specifically emotional intimacy. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I think I've seen all the episodes so far, and I'm really excited to get into the topic of today.
It's a pleasure to have you because I think one of the things that we see a lot of in the clinic, whether we're looking at individuals or couples or even families, is this idea of intimacy and connection. And so today I know we're going to focus on emotional intimacy, but maybe we can start the episode by walking our viewers through what intimacy means, the different forms, and what emotional intimacy in specific is.
Sure, sure. So, intimacy can feel like such an abstract word. And usually, when people hear intimacy, the first thing they think about is physical intimacy, and specifically also sexual intimacy. And while those are definitely types of intimacy, what we're going to be focusing on today is going to be emotional intimacy. But I did want to highlight that there are a lot of different kinds of intimacy that we're not going to be able to get into all of them specifically today. But let's say physical intimacy, that when people say that, it tends to mean non-sexual touch, right? So kind of like cuddling, holding hands, just being in general proximity together. Whereas obviously sexual intimacy is more, sexual. And other than that, we can extend to something called intellectual intimacy, which means like connecting with someone on an intellectual level, exchanging ideas. There's, political intimacy, kind of exchanging those ideas and our political views. So it can just be as wide a net as you want it to be. But today, I think focusing on just emotional intimacy is going to take up most of our time.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. So, what is emotional intimacy? When you use that term, what are you referring to? How do we define it?
Right. So, obviously, when you think emotion, you think sort of that closeness that comes with it, sharing your emotions about something. And there's a lot of trust that needs to be involved in that. It's the feeling of, I can be real with you, and knowing that you're going to sit with me, you're not going to judge me. There's like this TikTok trend now of like, we listen and we don't judge.
Okay.
Right. And it's the same here, where you're just kind of able to be yourself in a space that feels very safe, very nurturing. There's a lot of mercy involved. And I think basically that's kind of like the gist of what emotional intimacy means.
Okay. So, as you were defining and describing what it looks like, I think one of the things that came up for me is this sense of being able to be vulnerable. Right. So I can be my true self, my authentic self, and maybe there are going to be certain things about me that you might like more than other things, but I feel safe enough in this space, in this relationship between us, that I can express or show you that.
Exactly. And, when you said the word safety, it reminded me of a disclosure that I'd like to make,
Okay.
is that emotional intimacy can only be reached in a relationship that is safe. And so this podcast, talking to the viewers, is for people in safe relationships. There's no abuse going on whatsoever, no emotional, physical, verbal, financial abuse. This is a safe baseline, safe relationship.
Okay.
You should not and cannot entertain the idea of being emotionally intimate with someone who, might be a danger to you. So I wanted to put that disclosure out there.
I think that's a really, really important caveat for people to be aware of. If someone is in a relationship that is free from abuse, what does the safety look like? So when somebody comes to see you in the clinic and they start talking about their relationship, whether they come to see you as an individual or as part of a couple, what are some of the things that you look for to assess whether or not there is emotional intimacy. And that also brings me to kind of a separate question, which is it a black and white thing? We're emotionally
Mm-hmm.
intimate or we're not? Or are there
Yeah.
shades of gray and different levels?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to answer the second part of your
Okay.
question first. Um, Definitely, it's not black and white,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's shades of gray. And just because your relationship might not have emotional intimacy present does not mean other aspects of your relationship aren't working.
Mm-hmm.
I run into so many couples, individuals that are in couples that tell me everything else is fine. Like,
Yeah.
admin wise, we're great. Like, we work so well together. They might own a business together and run it very smoothly. With the kids, we got it. We're great at parenting, but then there's this side that's not
Mm-hmm.
as present,
Mm-hmm.
and that's usually why couples come to me, or individuals kind of struggling in the relationship, is because they feel like they've lost that sense of connection to their partner.
What do you screen for?
Okay, what do I screen for? I mean, this might sound vague, but the vibe in the room, you
Okay.
can definitely, in a couple, feel if someone is holding back.
Mm-hmm.
You can feel when one partner is shut down, right? When immediately I'm feeling that in the room, I'm like, okay, there is not a lot of trust here. There is not a lot of safety. And, I think that when these types of couples come into the room, they're also often kind of just like gobsmacked of like, why? We
Mm-hmm.
weren't like this,
Yeah.
right? Like, every couple has the potential of going down that road, unfortunately, if they don't keep working at emotional intimacy. And that's what's often the hardest, because usually, I mean, this is probably your process as well when it comes to couples, is you kind of ask, like, what was the relationship like before, right? When you guys first started dating
Mm-hmm.
and getting together, and you see their eyes just being like, it was great, it was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the tragedy of it. It's like, we had it and now we lost it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that answers your
Yeah, no,
question.
definitely. And as you were sharing and talking about the vibe, I was sort of thinking about how people present to me in couples therapy. And in my office, I have my chair and I've got a couch, very kind of
Yeah.
stereotypical, but the couch is a big couch.
Mm-hmm.
And so people can sit either really close
Yep.
or really far.
Mm-hmm.
They can angle themselves towards one another
Yep.
or away. And there's a lot in where they sit, how they sit, and the body language that you can pick up on
Mm-hmm.
before they even start sharing. I don't know if that's been your experience as well.
Definitely. And that's also been part of assessing where the work is at,
Mm-hmm.
is that beauty of, as the sessions go on and hopefully progress is being made, you kind of see them
Mm-hmm.
shifting a little closer to
Yes.
each other. When a partner is having an emotional moment, you see the other partner reaching towards them, wanting to hold their hands. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely body language can tell you a lot. And that's also going to come into play when we talk about kind of how to cultivate good emotional intimacy in the relationship. It has a lot to do with your
Mm-hmm.
verbal cues
Yeah.
as well.
So you were saying that, and this is something that I see as well, professional life, personal life. I think all of us are aware or have some examples around us of people who start off really, really hot, really, really strong, really, really excited. As you were saying, like they describe the early days of the relationship all starry-eyed.
Yeah.
And then, life takes over. And especially when you're in a kind of young part of the family life cycle, the admin takes
Yep.
over, professional requirements take over, your own family obligations and so many other things take over. And one of the things that I've noticed is that people really shift away from actively engaging and trying to get to know different layers of the other person, and they become guided by assumptions because now it's not a new relationship. I don't need to ask you
Yeah.
to know what you like or what you believe in. I know, which is true to an
Yeah.
extent, but then also we grow and change and evolve as humans. And so if we're not kind of having those frequent check-ins and connections, it's like we're referencing sometimes an older version
Yeah.
of that person, and that can feel really tough for the person making the assumption as well as the person on the receiving end of those assumptions.
Definitely. And then where's the room for growth there,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you've boxed someone into a category, it's like, well, even if I try to change, your assumption of me is just kind of stuck in the past or stuck in this kind of narrow box. And definitely, I mean, something that's always present in the beginning of a relationship when you start dating someone is this sense of wonder, and you don't have an opinion of them yet. You don't have you're trying to build that image.
Yeah.
And so you're curious, right? You're asking questions, you're wanting to know them more. And as you get to know them more, that opinion forms, and it's like, well, like, I'm less curious. I already know everything I want to know. And then at some point, that curiosity tends to become almost defensive.
Definitely.
Or set in a defensive tone. So as opposed to being curious and just being like, oh, well, you know, why did you do X, Y, Z? Like, I'm curious. You know, what was your thought process there? Versus shift in tone. Why would you do that?
Yep.
Right? Like, why would you put the coaster, like, not put your cup with the coaster again? Right? And it's as opposed to, I know you usually, like, you know that I mind this, right? And you didn't do it. Is something on your mind today? Like, is something going on?
Yep.
Very different.
Very
and
different.
will be received very different than that kind of,
you
know, attacking.
Well, and as you were giving that example, which I think is an excellent one, because you're talking about something very mundane.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we see in couples therapy is mundane stuff, but the mundane stuff is symbolic of much deeper stuff. So there's that going on, but then also, in addition to the difference in the tone, there is the benefit of the doubt or the assumption of the worst. So when you're asking, is there something on your mind? Like you normally do that. You're curious and you're like, okay, you're not a terrible, messy, horrific human being that is out there to like ruin my mood. Something must be bothering you. Talk to me about it, rather than the former. And when you do it the first way, unless your partner is like very attuned and can regulate very well, that is probably going to be the breeding ground for resentment, conflict, all sorts of things.
Definitely. And as you also said resentment, it made me think about, I was reading, what is it called? Bell Hooks, I forget what it's called, but the title has something love. I think all about love.
Okay.
And at some point in the book, she highlights this trend that I've been seeing for years in the clinic, but just haven't like it's something that I flagged in the back of my mind, being like, interesting, like why do people do this? Is that they start fibbing or lying about the little things to avoid potential conflict, right? And I see this all the time, and it starts off even at the beginning, when like a couple is first moving in together or planning a wedding together. It's like, whatever, I'm just gonna let it go. I'm just not even gonna tell them what I actually feel to avoid potentially upsetting them or getting into something. And while it might be, I don't know, like I had a client once kind of like, you know, wanting a DJ at their wedding versus, you know, the partner wanting a full band. And, you know, she was very keen on, you know, having the DJ. And just like, you know what, I'm not even gonna tell them, I'm just gonna, whatever, I don't care. And I was like, okay, fine, that's fine. Come the wedding, she is visibly just like not having it. And that kind of resentment comes up. I know it feels like a small thing to kind of lie about or want to omit, but I find that couples that do that regularly, consistently, just create more of that divide in the relationship, if that makes sense.
It does. It makes a lot of sense, and it's something I see as well. And then also what ends up happening is there's this idea or wish or desire. It's like the path of least resistance in the moment, but what people don't always recognize, or they recognize and they want to kind of postpone it, is those feelings are going to come out eventually.
Yeah.
So you might suppress or not express that you want that DJ. And you go along with it, and you go along with it, and you go along with it, and then all of a sudden there's an outburst, and your partner is looking at you like, but why didn't you just say anything?
Yeah.
Right? And so that leads me to the question of, well, why? Why do people suppress and not express? Our viewers might be thinking, well, that's not really that big of a deal. It's a pretty inconsequential thing.
Yeah.
Express it, find a compromise. Maybe you can have both. What holds people back?
Oof, so many things. So many things get in the way. And like starting at the most basic level, past experiences that have gone bad, where you've tried to take that road, that high road of, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to share, and then you've been shut down. This could be either by a caretaker, at school, being bullied for, speaking out about something, a past relationship. And so that kind of informed their decision of like, you know what, I'm just gonna grit my teeth and do what I need to do, and I'll be fine.
Yeah.
So that's definitely one of the biggest things.
So a idea of, or a question of, well, what's the point? I'm going to say it. I'm going to express my need. It's not going to be met. I'm just going to be disappointed that someone is hearing me and not fulfilling it. So it's better that I just swallow it and pretend it's not there.
Exactly.
Okay.
And there's only so much you can take of that before,
of course,
the coaster thing happens and you're blowing up.
Yep.
Right. And there's also other instances of, I think you've talked about this in a previous podcast episode about attachment styles, and that could definitely get in the way. So if someone's more anxiously attached, they have more of that people-pleasing tendency and kind of just wanting to go with the flow. And it's okay, I don't need to share my opinion. It'll be fine, right? I can take it. And then there's the avoidant attachment, which they might be terrified of any, like you might throw a bit of intimacy out there and they see that and they want to run, right? It's too much. They're afraid. And so attachment styles definitely also can muddle the way that you see bits of intimacy and connection. And there's that fear of rejection and abandon. Like if I'm really honest with you and I show you who I am, will you stay? Will you still love me? And that is terrifying for people. And it's like, I would rather not have to face that question and just be put on a mask with you than face the possibility of you rejecting me, leaving me.
No, definitely. But then what can happen is that over time, different sides eventually come out, maybe as people get a little bit older, more self-confident, more secure in the relationship, somehow more embedded in the relationship. Different things start to become expressed, and then the other partner is just like, where did this come from? Who are you? Were you this person all along? And then that can be a little bit disruptive as well, right?
Definitely. And it can, when one person's trying to shift the dynamic and the other person's not on board or not really knowing what's going on, that's one of the big things is intentionality. Like I deal with this a lot with my individual clients because I'm not seeing them as a couple. I'm dealing with one person and this person's ready, right? They're ready to have that emotional intimacy and to start having these deep, meaningful conversations, but they haven't clued their partner into what's going on, right? So they're in still like that defensive mode of, you didn't tell me you were going to start listening to what I'm saying and not, jumping at my throat if I say the wrong thing. So there definitely has to be that sense of, this is not a you problem or a me problem. This is an us situation, and this is a relationship problem that we need to, it's a common goal for us that we need to get at together.
And I think that's really important. It's something I always say to my couples clients as well, is that with the exception of abuse, everything else is shared. Everything, including betrayal. And that is something that can be really difficult for the person on the receiving end, the betrayed partner, to hear. But everything has inputs from both sides. And I think sometimes people can feel a little bit defensive about that, especially when they think that they're the victim in the situation. But also there is a layer of empowerment in thinking in that way, because then you're not relinquishing control to shifting the dynamic to one person only. It's like there are two inputs into this dynamic, and both of us have the power to shift it a bit, at least.
Definitely. And that's a big piece of like the mutuality, right? I've worked with so many couples and individuals that they're the ones always starting the conversation. They're the ones always going for the bids of intimacy, and it's one-sided. And it can't be. It can't be this, one person working at it and the other person just sitting in their corner, not reaching for each other.
Yeah.
You both need to be reaching for each other.
Yeah.
And it's hard if it's not, it's not familiar to everyone. A lot of us don't see it growing up, whether it's like with our parents or grandparents, friends, at school. We don't really see this mutual exchange of, I want to be real with you. I want to be honest, even if it hurts.
Yeah.
Even if it hurts me, even if it hurts you, I want to say it.
One of the things I'm thinking of right now is this concept of, I think it's Gary Chapman's love languages. And I know there's not a lot of empirical support for this, but it is something that resonates with a lot of people. And so for people who aren't familiar with this concept, it's the idea that people send and receive love in different ways. I think there's time together, so quality time, there's gifts, there's words of affirmation, there's acts of service, and there's a fifth one.
Did you say gift giving yet?
Physical touch.
Physical
yes.
touch.
So these are the five. And the reason I'm referencing it is because what I see sometimes is someone saying, I feel a bit of a disconnect from my partner. I don't feel close. Like, I'm always the one that has to initiate the cuddling in bed. I buy these extravagant, or not even extravagant, small gifts from the supermarket. I pick things up for him or her, and I get nothing in return. And part of it is that people don't recognize when the other person is expressing some form of emotional closeness or trying to draw that person in, because it's in a different way. So part of what we do in my work with couples is like, okay, how do you want to feel close? What are the different media that you can use for that? What do you like? How are you doing it? How does your partner know you're doing it? And how do they want to receive it?
Right, exactly. And that's where it has to be both of them reaching for each other. It cannot be one person trying to adapt and change to be like, okay, usually physical touch is not my thing. It's not my way of showing I love you and appreciate you, but I know it's yours, so I'm gonna make the effort. If that person keeps doing that and the other person's giving them nothing, right? In exchange, they're not, maybe theirs is like words of affirmation and praise, and they're not getting any of that. They're gonna burn out.
Definitely.
They're gonna feel resentful. Like, I'm doing this thing that I know is important to you, and you're giving me nothing. It doesn't feel fair.
No, it doesn't. And if we look at some of the social psychological theories of love, one of the things that we see kind of time and time again is there needs to be some level of reciprocity, some level of equitability within the relationship. And it's not like I did the dishes on Monday, you have to do the dishes on Tuesday, but it's like, I'm meeting you where you're at with this, you need to meet me where I'm at with that. If I'm carrying the load, all of the load, then like you said, there's the burnout, and then there's the resentment. And what I see sometimes, and I know we're not really speaking about other forms of intimacy today, but sometimes that can also really mess with sexual intimacy when it's like, I'm taking care of you and I'm doing everything, and I almost feel like you're my third child rather than my wife or my husband or partner. It really can derail things. So going back to a word you used, I think it's really important to underscore mutuality. There's two people, and two people kind of need to do the work and meet each other where they're at. Otherwise, we're just going to be spinning in circles.
Definitely. And that is a beautiful point to bring up, because they're so related. Sexual intimacy and emotional intimacy there's a positive correlation there, right? If emotional intimacy is doing well, physical is going to follow, the sexual is going to follow, right? And, I don't want to generalize. At the same time, what I see in the clinic is a lot of the women that I work with are sort of starved for that emotional intimacy and almost choose to it might not be a conscious choice, but it's almost like it's their way of letting the other person know, like, hey, you don't get access to me in the bedroom now, right? Like, and it's not a form of punishment, but it's kind of like, no, you don't get this part of me. And research shows us that, in what predicts lifetime kind of satisfaction in a relationship is having that emotional connection, and very much impacts the sexual and physical component positively.
I don't know if this has been your experience as well, but sometimes what happens is, and I know we're generalizing, and we definitely see the inverse, right?
Yes.
But sometimes men, to feel and to express that emotional connection, they need to have that physical or sexual connection, and it ends up being like a chicken and egg situation.
Yes.
It's like, okay, I want to feel closer to you. Sex makes me feel closer to you, and it's like, well, I'm not having sex until I feel closer to you. And then it's like, well, who wins?
Exactly. And which is why you both need to be working towards each other. You need to move towards each other as opposed to away, as opposed to just sitting in your corners and no one's reaching for any. We're not going to get anywhere.
Exactly.
Right? And I'm very real with my couples in session. I'm just like, we can sit here. You can waste your money.
Yep.
Or we can actually start doing the work. You can start reaching for each other. Just an effort of goodwill towards one another. And let's see where that takes us.
Yeah. Little by little, experiment with different things and see how it goes. I think it's definitely important. And some of the resistance I see with clients sometimes is like, oh, but this feels so like fake and forced and unnatural. And I get that, but so is anything that's going to be different or a change. And we can't expect to make a significant or even a small shift in a relational dynamic if we're doing everything exactly the same. So part of it is moving through some of that discomfort, giving things a bit of a go, and then, iteratively refining them until you find something that works. So we talked a little bit about emotional intimacy and how there are different forms of intimacy, and how emotional intimacy can start off kind of strong and then over time it can dissipate, and some of the dynamics around that. When people come to see you in the clinic presenting with this as an issue, we had it and now it's gone.
Yeah.
What do you do? How do you work with them? What are things that people can do to cultivate emotional intimacy? And I'll ask you in two scenarios. Okay. One, where the couple presents together, acknowledging that it's a shared problem.
Yeah.
And then the second, you said you work with individuals on this too, when someone comes in and is like, I feel lonely in my relationship, which, by the way, is like the worst feeling to have, lonely in the presence of other people. I feel lonely in my relationship. My husband or wife feels like everything is hunky-dory, or at least that's how they present. How do you work with them?
Right. Beautiful questions. So the first part of the question, I would observe, first of all, kind of what is going on in the room, right? If they're having a disagreement in front of me in session, I'm observing kind of what's going on, right? What are the dynamics at play? And what I tend to see is solution-focused people. Okay, this is for all of my solution-focused people. This advice is for you. Listen, right? Listen to what your partner is saying, and instead of trying to fix the emotion, just try to sit in it with them. And that can feel like very simple, like such a simple thing to do. But I find that a lot of people don't have what I think is called like emotional literacy. They don't know kind of what to label their own emotions, let alone someone else's emotions. And so they're like, I very much dislike seeing you struggling and in pain, so I'm just going to offer you a solution to make that feeling go away.
And the intentionality is
beautiful.
Wonderful, exactly.
Right? It's a very kind intentionality. And that's a lot of the times what I see in couples that come to me. It's like, we want to work on this, right? But we don't know how. And it starts by just acknowledging what the speaker is saying. Just being like, okay, so you feel lonely when, you know, you're trying to sit on the couch with me and I'm just sitting at the other end watching TV and not really paying attention to you. That must feel, you must be really bad in those moments. I have one person say to the other person that, the other person's sobbing like, yes, you got it, like that is exactly what I'm feeling. So that's one thing that I see. The other is, I don't know if you've experienced this as well, but it starts feeling like you're in a courtroom somehow.
Oh, yes.
And it starts being like, no, but I actually did if I hear about the dishes one more time.
I know.
in couples, but it's like, no, I did the dishes last week and I told you to do them this week. And it starts becoming this sort of nitty gritty, you know, she said, he said situation. And
they look to you like you're the judge also.
Yes.
Like you're going to be
100%.
like, you were wrong.
100%.
Just not what we do.
You know, much to their disappointment. I'm like, okay, this is not where this is going. But that is exhausting to feel like you need to prove your point and prove that, no, I get to feel the way that I do.
Yeah.
Right? That shouldn't need to be proven. It's just, you feel the way you do.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's irrational. Sometimes it's not based in reality, but it's how I feel and I can't help it.
Yeah, exactly. And it comes from somewhere.
Yes.
Right? It's not usually with the intention of inflicting something negative on the other partner. But you know, when you were saying before for the solution focus, the fixers, it kind of linked for me with what we were talking about at the beginning of the episode, which is this idea that we need to be curious. Because a lot of times when our partner, especially in long-term relationships, we think we know and understand. I have so many partners that have said to me in front of their partner, I know him or her better than he or she knows themselves. And it's like, okay, I know that there is a history and that you're probably going to get things right more often than not. But at the same time, we have to give people the opportunity to express. And when they express, we have to make it a safe space. Otherwise, they're just going to stop. So if we can remove ourselves from this fixing role and just approach it with, okay, like, I don't see it like that at all, but I'm just really curious what's going on, and ask the follow-up questions to try to deepen your knowledge. That's really helpful. And then the other thing that you were saying, it kind of reminds me of something I see all the time as well, which is this idea of someone just listening to rebut. They look like they're intently listening, but they're only listening to catch it. And this is where, you know, the Gottmans and many other you know, clinicians and researchers will say, like, don't use those black and white always and never statements, because if I'm listening to rebut something you say to me, you say you never do the dishes, I'm going to find that time in like 1974 when I did the dishes, and I'm going to invalidate what you said, and you're going to be really mad that I'm not able to hear what it is that you're saying. So there are so many different layers, but I think a lot of it is served by slowing down, approaching, like you said, going back to this idea of mutuality. We're a team, we're working together. Either we both win or we both lose. That's another thing, right? There's no such thing as I win against you.
Like, exactly. And I think Gottman, was it John or Joe? I always forget. But I think he said, you know, you could be right or you could be in a relationship.
Yeah, true.
Right? And it's like you can't, it can't be about winning, right? Because if one of you's winning, the relationship is losing.
Exactly.
So, you know, it goes back to what you were saying about mutuality, slowing down, and for the one talking as well, I wanna state this, is that they also have a responsibility of owning their emotions, right? So using I statements, being like, I felt this way when you didn't put your cup on the coaster, right? And, you know, acknowledging that they have a narrative in their head that they're choosing to share with their partner, but that narrative can be open to getting rewritten. And I think that going back to the emotional literacy, right? In order for the speaker to be able to say, I feel XYZ, they need to be able to identify what's going on for them, as opposed to you didn't put the water on the coaster, and you're good for nothing, and that immediately invites defensiveness, and then you're back in the courtroom.
Exactly. And you get nowhere, and both of you leave that situation feeling depleted, resentful. A lot of times people feel pretty hopeless and stuck in the relationship. So I think the emotional literacy piece is important. I don't know about you, I assume so, but like we have so many wonderful tools that we can share with our clients to help them identify the primary, the secondary, the tertiary emotions, to put the labels on them. And then with that curiosity, their partner can try to understand, like, where did all of that, like, how does that work, and where did that come from? Like, that would never happen for me,
Right.
but that's because I'm a different person with different personality, different history, different needs, and so on and so forth. I think you said something extremely, extremely important. When we're expressing something that's difficult for us, that coaster thing, like going back to the coaster or the dishes, there's a need there. It's not just you didn't do this or you did this. It's like I feel a sense, for example, of stability and peace and calmness when my environment is tidy. Right? That is a little bit easier to understand than you're a dirty animal that just leaves stuff everywhere and I just have to slum it when I cohabitate with you.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a skill that is worked at, and that this is where the mercy piece comes back in, is knowing that your partner is trying and they might not get it right the first time. You said it very beautifully, very eloquently. You've had a lifetime of experience kind of learning this technique, learning how to express your emotions and saying them in a way that you're truly owning them, right? As opposed to putting the blame on someone else. And it takes people a while to get there. And so they might stumble and you might get hurt in the process, or they might get hurt in the process, but it's about coming back to each other and working at it, being like almost having a debrief or a post-mortem after a conflict, being like, I don't know, that kind of felt like unresolved to me, or I don't know how we did there. How do you feel? So I think that that's also definitely a way to go.
No, I definitely agree with you, and it is something that is a work of progress. It takes time, and I love the emphasis that you've made on this concept of mercy, because mercy just really shows that I'm not expecting you to be perfect. I know you're going to mess up, just like I'm going to mess up. That is just the nature of two people being in any form of relationship, let alone an intimate relationship. But you're showing up and you're trying, and we're working together for the greater good of us as a partnership. I think that's really important. What do you do in that situation when, well, actually a little bit different than what I had asked you previously. Sometimes people will present like, okay, we know there's a problem, we want to do the work. And one person is much more verbose and comfortable expressing themselves, and the other person is kind of happy to let him or her take up all of the airtime. And when the question is asked, okay, like, what's your perspective on this? Or like, what's something that you would like? Or what is something that you need? Oh, no, nothing. Where does that come from, and how do you navigate a situation like that to help the couple build emotional intimacy?
Right. So, again, that might come sort of similarly to the barriers we were talking about earlier. It might be like their own stuff coming up. It might feel hard for them to express their needs, and it might feel really scary to express their needs at some point, and for them have them be ignored. Right. And for people that are quietly kind of sitting in their corner being like, no, I'm fine, like everything's good for me, I try to get a little humor in it and just be like, really, there's nothing, like everything's perfect, everything's fine, and the relationship is amazing. And that's where it's kind of like, well, no, not in absolute, like it's not like always perfect. I'm like, okay, great, tell me about when it feels a little rocky for you. And slowly, it's almost like a turtle in their shell, and you're almost like coaxing them and making them feel safe. Right. So also not just safety in the relationship, but in the therapeutic relationship as well, knowing like we're not going to be tag teaming against you.
No.
right? This is also a safe space for you. And their answer might be like, there might be something that I need, but I don't know what it is. And we can work on identifying.
We can work on that, definitely. And you're right, in terms of the safety and the therapeutic relationship, and what's important for everyone to understand is our client as a couples therapist or a sex therapist is the relationship. It's not either partner, it's the space between them. That's where our priorities and obligations lie. But then also the partner that wants more, that wants to know more or hear more, also needs to cultivate that safety. And that means putting the assumptions to the side, you know, inviting the feedback, approaching with curiosity, and then when you hear something, not dismissing it or telling them, no, 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 that's not you. I know you better than you know yourself. That just further reinforces that person's or that turtle's desire to go back into the shell, right?
Definitely. And I wanted to go back to that question that you had asked initially, that you kind of changed about, you know, what if one person's coming to me as an individual and telling me like, hey, like, I don't know how to engage my partner in this. I wanted to highlight the different kinds of intimacy that exist, or emotional intimacy, the different levels that exist there.
Okay.
We can think of it as almost like your house, right? There are people that are going to knock at the door, you know, not really know which way to go. You know, you're going to have to guide them to the living room, the guest living room, right? And that's kind of what we call the informational level of intimacy. Where it's like, hi, how are you? I'm good. You know, I didn't sleep too well last night, but I'm good. Then we have that second level where, you know, the people, you know, person coming at your door doesn't really knock, knows to go in, knows where the living room is, knows where the kitchen is, how to make their coffee and their tea. Like, they know where the cups are, right? That's a more personable level of intimacy. It's more personal. You can, you know, hi, how are you? I'm good. I didn't sleep too well last night. I'm kind of nervous. I have to film this podcast for work and, you know, I'm nervous about it, but I'm good. I'll be good, right? And then you have that third level where that person comes in, they have their own set of keys. They can come in. They have access to your bedroom. They have access to your basement, right? To the kind of skeletons in the closet. And they know you and they know your inner world and what's going on for you. And that could be, hi, how are you? You know, actually, as you're asking me this question, my heart's racing right now. I didn't sleep too well last night. Nervous about this podcast that I'm filming. I'm actually very excited, but very nervous. And I have this like slew, like this monologue going in my head about how, you know, I'm terrible and this is going to go really poorly, right? I don't know what to do about that, right? So it's sharing literally the minute by minute, like heart's racing, palms are sweaty. I don't know what to do. And I'm working through my emotions as I'm talking to you. And that's that third level. And a lot of us end up staying at that second level where we've already worked through something or don't really share everything, but we share a little bit and just enough. And I help the clients identify where they're sort of at with those different levels and how do we get from that personable to that more like relational intimacy, and that you have to baby step it. It's not going to be an overnight success.
You know, I think that's a really, really helpful way to kind of demarcate different levels of emotional intimacy. But as you were sharing, one of the things that came up for me is that in every relationship, I don't know if this is what you see or not, there's also seasons, right? Sometimes we're in that third level, the really deep one where you come downstairs and before you even say, I'm really nervous and I'm having all these monologues, I can be like, I see it on your face.
Right.
I can feel it. You went for this coffee and not that coffee. There's all of those things. And then there are other phases in the relationship where there is that sense of, you know, I don't really know. And I'm almost walking on eggshells. And then there's another phase where it is kind of superficial. I know you, but I feel like there's something that I don't know. Do you experience or see that relationships can have seasons?
Definitely. And I normalize that as well. Like you cannot always be in tune
Mm-hmm.
all the time for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
That is a full-time job,
Yeah.
and it's something you have to consistently work at. But there are going to be times where, I've worked with so many couples that have just had kids,
Yeah.
or, especially the beginning stages.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I don't have time to
Mm-hmm.
sit and reflect and think. I need to go, go, go. Right. And so it's normal. It doesn't necessarily mean, the house is burning down, the relationship is over, that's it. Emotional intimacy is dead. But there are seasons, and it's again about having that mercy and that trust
Mm-hmm.
in the fact that we'll find our way back.
Yeah.
Like, we will get there. It might take a little bit of time and effort, but we'll get there eventually.
And, there are different sort of stages in the family life cycle that are a little bit more challenging than others. Like you said, the transition to parenthood can be really tough on families, especially the first time around, but then also
Mm-hmm.
kind of depending on the needs of the child and the broader family system. But another thing that I find sometimes happens is that couples identify that, okay, we're in a little bit of a rut, but we're going to deal with that later. And
Mm-hmm.
that's fair.
Yeah.
But it's not also like I'm dealing with it or I'm ignoring it. There are still bits and pieces
Mm-hmm.
that can be done to kind of keep things from deteriorating further,
Mm-hmm.
if not sort of moving things along in a more general or positive direction.
Definitely. And this is where kind of like check-ins come in,
Mm-hmm.
and acknowledging the stage of life, acknowledging like, hey, we might not have as much time to sit and connect and talk, but I promise that, give me 2 weeks time, give me a month's time, give me this amount of time, and I will come back. And this might also be because, we talked about having a child, but it could be like aging parents and
Mm-hmm.
needing to take care of them and other things taking the priority.
Mm-hmm.
But it's essentially knowing that, your partner also does have priority, and that they will get it.
Mm-hmm.
It just might take a little bit of time, but those check-ins are necessary, of saying like, hey, I love you, I still care about you.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've been, neglecting this part of our relationship,
Mm-hmm.
but I will come back. So just the other person having that reassurance of like, they still see me.
And naming it that
Yes.
this is something that I
Yes.
see as well. It's not just in your head. And when you were saying about the aging parents and being new parents and then also professional things,
Mm-hmm.
what came up for me is this idea that we all have different roles.
Yeah.
Right? We occupy so many different roles in our
Mm-hmm.
lives. We are professionals, children, parents. We
Yep.
might be siblings, friends,
Mm-hmm.
colleagues, etc., etc. We will always be partners. And that label might be kind of more prominent
Mm-hmm.
at certain times of your life as well as the relationship, and less than others. But also, I think parents need to try to maintain a little bit of that partnership. And sometimes, I know it's easier said than done, that might look like when we are stealing that pocket of time together,
Mm-hmm.
it's not to plan our next family vacation.
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. And I think that it comes from a good place. It comes
Yeah.
from, I want to give my kids everything, my all, but it cannot be at the detriment of your relationship, because guess what? They're going to feel it too,
Yeah.
right? If you and your partner aren't connecting anymore, and that resentment and that burnout is building up and building up, they will feel it. They will get affected. And so taking care of the relationship and nurturing it is a priority for you, for your partner, and for the kids.
Yeah. And I think zooming out, because a lot of, especially in this society and this period of time, there is this idea that we need to be productive 24/7. So it's like, we've got time together. We're both smart
Right.
people. Our time is pretty precious. Like, let's boom, boom, boom this thing. But also getting to know each other in a different way, expanding our knowledge and our connection is serving a purpose. Even if it's not maybe as tangible as setting the budget, the family budget for next
Right.
year, it is still a purpose. And sometimes recalibrating or reframing what we see as our goals and our priorities can really help with that process. And again, I know it's easier said than done.
Right.
There's a lot of research showing that especially young families, the amount of time that parents even have together is like what, 30 minutes a week.
Yeah.
I've heard that statistic.
Mm-hmm.
It's minimal, so you want to make the time count, but this is also a very important thing to work on.
Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that I got reminded by as you were speaking was there's a form of intimacy I didn't get to talk about, which is called experiential
Yes.
intimacy. And it's all about having shared experiences together. And again, away from the family, having that kind of intimacy with your family and your kids is great. It's amazing. But it's having that connection that you initially had, because that's what happens at the beginning of dating. You're doing things together, you're having fun activities and experiences, and somewhere along the way it just stops counting as much, and that's where the issues start.
And then it becomes very family focused.
Yes.
And sometimes, you know, and again, those are beautiful memories and it's wonderful. And I think lots of people wish they had more time to spend with their children because of our demands. I totally get that. But like, you know, being in Dubai, thinking about something like Topgolf.
Yeah.
Like you can go as a pair.
Exactly.
It doesn't only have to be as a family date. And sometimes when you have an activity that the two of you are doing, it is a really natural and easy way to not talk about work, to not talk about mom and dad, to not talk about the budget, and to just have fun, nurture that sense of adventure, that spontaneity, that excitement that we have at the beginning that naturally kind of dissipates over time.
I think you said that beautifully. I completely agree. It helps the relationship be at a healthy state, to have these kind of beautiful moments that you share together and that you can talk about later on, and that it's not always serious. Because I know when we say emotional intimacy, it feels like all these like really deep conversations that are just going to take a lot out of you. It can't always be that. There needs to be joy, there needs to be fun. So also remembering that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we talked about intimacy, emotional intimacy, examples of it, levels of it, kind of the way that it fluctuates over time, some of the things that we can do to nurture it, and really focusing on that mutuality and kind of consistency and naming and all of that. Is there anything else that you think would be helpful to share with our viewers today?
Yes, actually. I think that a reminder that people should keep in mind is that emotional intimacy it's not a destination, right? It's a journey, and you kind of have to be on it. And it's not like, okay, we get there and now we can just be lazy about it and just not, you know, we're there. And so continuing to work at it. Dips are natural, right? So normalizing that for yourself and offering yourself that kind of comfort, but ultimately knowing that it's something that you're going to have to work at for forever to keep the relationship healthy.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that's very, very important feedback and advice, and I hope that people kind of onboard that. And I think kind of in line with what you were saying before when you're talking about couples coming in and really being motivated to work on things, that I would imagine tends to happen more with the couples who are proactive, who start to notice that things aren't quite the way that they were, the way that they could be, the way that they want them to be, rather than kind of couples who noticed that some time ago and kind of continue to drift apart. So that proactivity piece, I think, is really, really, really important. You don't have to wait until the house is on fire to come to therapy, you know, and or forget about therapy, to start trying to do things different. There's a lot of resources, self-help resources that people can utilize. Just when you start to notice that things don't feel quite right or could be better, a little intervention, and then taking stock and keeping track of how that's landing and the impact it's having, I think is really important too.
Definitely. And there's a lot of ways or mediums that people can go about doing that, like therapy and self-help books, and just, you know, carving out that time to check in with each other. But yeah, I do encourage people to come to therapy, whether it's individual or couple. Sometimes it feels less intimidating knowing that there's a third person there to help mitigate what's going on, making sure it doesn't turn into a courtroom, and creating that environment of safety.
Yeah, and I feel like I often tell couples that I work with, I'm not the arbitrator, I'm the translator. So
I
I
love
hear
that.
it coming out this way, and you're hearing it this way, and I totally get why. However,
Mm-hmm.
this is actually maybe what's happening, and trying to help them get the language to be able to converse more efficiently, and
Mm-hmm.
more understandably with one another. I remember, Judy, there was a point when you, within our group at Thrive,
Mm-hmm.
recommended this box of cards.
Yeah.
So you use
Mm-hmm.
sometimes these different tools. Maybe you can
Yes.
walk our audience through, how some of these things
Mm-hmm.
might work, and we can also share the details of those
Definitely.
tools and others.
Definitely. I completely forgot about that. But yes, there is, if you look it up, just Google and we can kind of link it as well, the intimacy deck of cards.
Mm-hmm.
And it has different sort of themes and
Mm-hmm.
different pockets of questions, or prompts. And it could be about your past, or um, how do you feel about the current relationship, sexual intimacy, what other aspects? I think career, and just if you don't know how to go back to that sense of, I forgot how to be curious about
Mm-hmm.
you, right? These can be great prompts to, okay, well, these cards kind of help. They take the pressure off of us to come up with these deep, meaningful questions, and
Mm-hmm.
we can just ask each other these questions and start to check in with each other, and not just go into the admin stuff, because it's so easy for couples to just
Yeah,
go back
autopilot.
to that.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And then, maybe some couples, and talking about sexual intimacy can be a little bit challenging.
Mm-hmm.
So, with a deck of cards like that, if you know that this is not really where I want to go right now, just take them out,
Exactly.
pick from the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
But I like suggesting those for couples as well. Like the Gottmans have the love maps,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
the open-ended questions, and things that you would just not normally think of. The Berkeley has like 36
Mm-hmm.
questions. There are so many different things that, as you said,
Yeah.
remind you how to be curious and take the pressure off of you to generate this
Mm-hmm.
question. Because sometimes I think also what happens is, if we have this conversation with a couple that, okay, we need to have more curiosity, and then they're not able to do it, it's like, oh my God,
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
that is indicative of
Something's
the
wrong.
state of
Yeah.
affairs.
Mm-hmm.
And, or, well, I was able to come up with a question and you can't.
Right.
Like, I'm more
Right.
bought into this
Mm-hmm.
relationship than you are. And so this really, as you said,
Yeah.
very importantly, alleviates the pressure. So there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. Therapy is helpful, but
Mm-hmm.
not everyone wants to do it. It can be something that's a bit difficult to access for
Sure.
some people. But there are tools that we can use reactively as well
Mm-hmm.
as proactively to try to nurture the
Mm-hmm.
emotional intimacy, which is very, very important for so
Yeah.
many things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you so much for all of your insights. You shared so many helpful pieces of information,
Mm-hmm.
not just in terms of defining, but also how things show up, why things show up, and some of the
Mm-hmm.
actionable steps that we can take.
Mm-hmm.
It was really my pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
And as we said at the beginning, you're with us at Thrive. I don't think I mentioned you've been with us since March 2024,
Mm-hmm.
working with adults as well as couples for relationship issues, including intimacy,
Mm-hmm.
but also a whole host of other presenting problems.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, Judy.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Sarah. You've been a great host. I felt so at home. I told you before I was a little nervous, but the conversation felt like it just flowed and the time flew by. So thank you so
Yeah, it
much.
really did. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. It was a pleasure.